Great. Okay, so shoulder girdle dysfunction. I'm going to be talking about this in horses, but obviously we can relate this to dogs as well. For those of you that are joining me for the first time in the webinar, welcome. Nice to see you. Nice to meet you. And for those of you that have joined me from the previous webinar, hello again, and I appreciate you joining me live. Let's get started. Okay, so introduction. I know some of you know me, but for those of you who don't, I'm an animal chiropractor. I trained at the Mactimony College of Chiropractic. Before that, I did soft tissue massage. This was predominantly in horses and dogs. And after doing that for a few years, I thought to myself, there is something missing. And that's why I joined on to be a chiropractor. I have had over 20 years of experience in the equine field. This is ranging from riding competitively, but then also training and retraining horses from all breeds and disciplines. I'm a massive animal lover, and I am on a mission to make groundwork training fun, simple, and enjoyable, because I keep banging on about it, but horses are very weak. Their skeleton is not actually built for riding. So the more in-hand work we do with them, and the more knowledge we have about the in-hand work, the more we can actually enjoy our horse for the long term. So today, what I'm going to cover, I'm going to talk about what is shoulder girdle dysfunction. We're going to go into a little bit about anatomy. I'm going to give you some current research that is currently out there. Again, because there's limited research on horses, this is going to be across species. We're going to talk about some of the symptoms that a horse can display if they have an issue with their shoulder girdle. We're going to talk about how to assess this, how to treat it, and then I'm going to give you my top 3 exercises to help strengthen the shoulder girdle, talk about a service update, and then we've got the live Q&A. Let's get started. Right, shoulder girdle dysfunction. I'm going to be very honest and say that when I've been to university and the courses I've done, we talk about the anatomy of the shoulder of the animal, and we talk about this is across species, so horses and dogs, but very little, if not any, information is taught to us and was taught to me about problems in the shoulder girdle, which is quite interesting, because if we refer this to the human field, there is ample amount of information, studies, research support showing the effect of shoulder injuries on the rest of the body. How I've noticed it as a practitioner is you are taught, say, how to realign the pelvis, asymmetries in the neck and the spine. But when you look at the shoulder girdle, and only later on now have I started to realize that horses that have had injuries to their pectorals, horses that are really struggling with their lateral work, horses that feel heavy in the contact, despite them having interventions from other therapists or training, a lot of people nowadays, and I was included, talk about training the horse from the pelvis. The pelvis is the engine of the horse. And yes, it is the engine. However, as you'll learn today, that engine is going to struggle to propel the horse forward if the shoulder girdle isn't functioning properly. I've just put at the bottom of the screen here that we all generally know this. On average, horses and dogs 60 to 58% onto their front end and 42% onto their back end. Okay, and this is quite common knowledge, but I think it's quite important to visualize this, because a lot of us, and me included in the past, have almost overlooked this very important statement that is at the bottom of the screen. Okay, so let's just talk a little bit about anatomy. I don't want to overload you with anatomy, because if I'm honest, the shoulder girdle is an extremely complicated girdle in the horse. And for those of you that do want to know more about the specific anatomy of it, I will do presentations later on about this, or email me directly, okay? But for the purpose of this presentation, as I've said, there's actually limited research in the anatomy, say dysfunction of the shoulder girdle in horses and dogs, but there is so much research and anatomy books on describing the shoulders and the thoracic sling. As I said, in humans, there is plenty, but I've just given you here a very simple statement, which is just on Google. Anyone can find this, and it says, If we think about the humans, in humans, it consists of the clavicle and the scapula. And in those species with 3 bones in the shoulder, it consists of the clavicle, scapula, and coracoid. Now, some mammalian species, such as the horse and the dog, only have the scapula. Now, just to reiterate what I've just said, I'm talking in reference to the shoulder girdle, not the thoracic sling, not the whole forelimb. I'm just talking about this picture here you can see, and then we've got the horse here, and then specifically the scapula. That is what we're talking about in reference to the shoulder girdle, okay? So compared to the humans, which in front of me right now, if you can just think about your shoulders and actually just move your shoulders round, the range of movement you have in your shoulder girdle, you know, you can basically move your arm in a 360-degree angle. You can also move it across. You can move in all kinds of directions. That's because of the way it sits with the clavicle and the scapula in a human. However, our horses and our dogs, they only have the scapula. Now, I think that's fascinating. And as we're now talking about here is, with the scapula, the shoulder girdle, there is no anatomical joint connecting the scapula, which is this bit here, onto the rib cage. It is all muscular and fascial connection, suspending the rib cage between the front legs. Now, if we just visualize this for a second, I've done my best here to create this little visual representation for you. So if you look at the picture on the left first, that's obviously what we see when we see a horse. And then if we strip away the skin and we then look at what we're looking at here, this is the shoulder girdle, which is this here, the scapula. Okay, and then really important, you can see there, the scapula onto the rib cage, there is absolutely no connection joint-wise, so no bone. It is completely a muscular connection. How I like to think about the pectoral region, now the pectoral is part of the shoulder girdle, and it is, if you look at this little diagram I've created down here, can you see the bottom muscle in the red are the pectorals? For me, the pectorals are like the pelvis is the lower limbs, okay? So it is a key muscular connection for stability and how your horse moves and how much range of movement they have. The key thing about this pectoral girdle is that it has actually sacrificed itself for stability. And that means that compared to a human, where we have this great range of movement in our shoulder girdle and we can really move in any direction, horses have sacrificed that range of movement for stability. And they've done this because, like I've shown you earlier, they carry almost 60% of their weight on their front end. So just think about this shoulder girdle as the stability house. So the pelvis is the powerhouse, the shoulder girdle is the stability. I've just done a little diagram here in more detail with the anatomy drawing around it. And I've actually circled this muscle here, the serratus ventralis muscle. Sorry if I'm getting technical with names, but I just want you to, if there's one muscle I want you to memorize today, it's this muscle, the serratus ventralis muscle. And you can tell its connection here. So the scapula, and you can tell how it comes down, connecting the scapula onto the rib cage. That is a very important muscle, which we will talk about more and more as we go on through this presentation. But I think this is quite a nice, simple anatomical drawing of the shoulder girdle and the connections keeping this together. Okay, so now let's talk about the research on the shoulder girdle. As I've said, there is actually to date, which is shocking, no research on shoulder girdle injuries in horses. Let's just stop for a moment and think about that statement. There is loads on shoulder girdle dysfunctions in humans, but when it comes to our horses and our dogs, the research is almost zero. There's a bit more, there's a little bit in dogs, but absolutely zero in horses. There's there's a few studies on describing the anatomy of the shoulder girdle, and this particular one by Hilary Clayton. I'm sure most of us know her. She's a vet, done a lot of research in the veterinary medicine and the veterinary field. And she has done this paper here, which highlights the significance of chest muscles in movement. She's focused on dressage horses. What Hilary has said here, and she's described, is after she described anatomy, as I've just done for you there, she's gone on to say how important the role of a therapist is in educating owners, but also helping the horse through the stability. And she's mentioned two muscles in particular, which I've mentioned to you before, the serratus ventralis, which is that muscle I showed you earlier, and that serratus ventralis is supported by the pectorals in the horse. Hilary goes on to say that contraction of the sling muscles lift the trunk and the withers between the scapula, raising the withers to the same height or higher than the croup. So let me explain that for you. So we've got a little visual representation here of this horse. I just highlighted the withers and the croup for you. She says contraction of the sling muscles. So imagine the sling muscles are all around here, okay, all around the scapula and the shoulder of the horse. The sling muscles lift the trunk and the withers between the scapula, raising the withers to the same height or higher than the croup, okay? I'm going to get onto that in a minute. She then says, when the horse travels without proper contraction of the sling muscles, horse's motion looks downhill and on the forehand. So again, I just visualized here for you. I've labeled that the withers and the croup. And so let's just go through what she's saying again. When the horse travels without proper contraction of the sling muscles, the horse's motion looks downhill on the forehand. So how many of you can relate to this? Because when I was reading the research around this, I've always been taught about the hind end coming forward and the powerhouse pushing the horse forward. When your horse can sit down, they flex through their back and they sit on the hindquarters to push forward. But no one really taught me and explained to me that you can have all the engine, the powerhouse from behind coming forward, but if your muscles, the sling muscles, aren't working in terms of contracting and lifting the front end up so that the withers highlighted here are higher or level than the croup, the back end has got nowhere to go. And that just to me makes so much sense. You know, horses are on four legs, dogs are on four legs, but I feel like a lot of people and a lot of trainers focus on the back end, whereas maybe we're missing something and maybe we should focus more on training the sling muscles in contracting and helping the horse lift up their trunk so that the back end has somewhere to go. Okay, Hilary continues to say, and she's written, it's the balance of the trunk that allows the push of the hind end to go through the horse's body without pushing it onto the forehand. And my take-home message from reading research around this is train your horse's front end, in particular the shoulder girdle. So I hope this is starting to make you think about how you're training your horse, and are you focusing on exercises that promote balance of the trunk, that promote stability, contraction to lift up the front end so that their lovely back end has somewhere to go. And then for me, that when I read this research, I was thinking, God, it makes so much sense. So this is why I've created this webinar today. So what does this mean? Just because there is limited research on shoulder girdle dysfunction or injuries doesn't mean they don't exist. And I don't know how many of you can relate to this. Let's turn that off. I can relate to this is I've come across horses that have either had an injury to their pectoral muscle, or they've had an injury to the muscle on the side of their scapula, and I'll hear, oh well, it happened ages ago, it doesn't matter, the horse is not sore, it's not lame, they're not sore when you touch them, so it doesn't affect them. And I don't blame anyone for thinking this, because as I've said, when you research these injuries in the shoulder girdle, there is nothing out there. And I think it's important that we as horse owners, horse lovers, start talking about this. So if someone does say to you, oh, well, my horse had an injury to that muscle in the chest or in the shoulder, and it doesn't matter. Just start to ask them questions, because we know as a human, looking at the research, if you've torn or you've injured a stability muscle and a muscle that helps in range of movement of your shoulders, of course you're going to be more dominant or you're going to be weaker on one side. So we need to start thinking the research is not there yet. It might not be there at the moment, but it's not there yet. And the more we start talking about it, the more awareness people will start to have. And most importantly, it would filter down to the people creating research and even our veterinarians. So I just want to give you some cross-species research, and this was one on dogs that I found very interesting. If anyone wants the specific papers, just send me an email and I can forward you on the papers. But this was a study or survey on 4,000 dogs on the most common injuries in agility dogs, which again, these are like your border collie types. And from the survey, 100% of the people highlighted shoulder injuries, which again, I find fascinating having treated dogs, because a lot of the research that I've come across in the past has been about issues to the cruciate ligaments or back issues, but nothing really focusing on the shoulders. And just remember, we spoke about how the horses transfer weight onto the front end. The dogs are the same. They're also more body weight through their front end than they are their back end. And just out of interest, which I've just put in there, is the second common injury was actually this group of muscle called the iliopsoas. And I think it's the iliopsoas muscle group is an unspoken, an unknown area that is starting to filter through the equine industry. But again, there's limited research on it. So I'm happy to do a talk on that, but I just thought I'd put that in there. This study was really fascinating, and this was by a group of people called Carrier in 2006. I've just put the screenshot of the paper there, and they looked at locomotor function of the pectoral girdle. Remember, the pectoral girdle in the shoulder helps with stability. Thoracic sling in trotting dogs. So what they found is by manipulating the locomotory forces in trotting dogs, they monitored the change in 5 extrinsic muscles. Now, I know this sounds a bit like I'm talking from an academic perspective, but just to break it down, is they monitored dogs on a treadmill, so they controlled the speed. And what they did is they monitored 5 extrinsic muscles, which they go into detail in the paper itself. And if you can see at the bottom of this thing called abstract, it says here, serratus ventralis muscle, again, important muscle. And what they did is they changed the gradient that the dog was going, so from straight to uphill, downhill. And then also they added on a harness, and they added on some weights on the dog's wrists. Now, I know I'm talking about dogs here, but if we can relate this and think about horses, what do we put on their back? Saddles. Yeah. And do we always ride our horses on flat surfaces? No. What do we do? Undulating surfaces. And I don't know if any of you've come across horses that have had injuries to undiagnosed injuries to their chest, so their pectorals, or even deeper, maybe the serratus ventralis muscle. Have you noticed that they'll be fine on the soft, hard ground? The minute you change the angulation of the ground, so a gradient that's steep, lowered, so either downhill or uphill, their front end changes from this lovely, powerful stride length to very short and choppy. And some horses will even start to do this plaiting movement. Now, why are we ignoring this? Because surely this is showing us and highlighting, the horse is clearly highlighting to us that they're fine on the soft, straight ground, but when you change the gradient, their whole mechanics change. And that to me is such an important behavior and change in body mechanics that we can't ignore. We shouldn't be ignoring. This study, the one that I've just said, highlighted that the serratus ventralis, and I put T and C there because from an anatomy perspective, this muscle is split into 2 parts, the thoracic part and the cervical part, is highly affected when adding weight or changing the gradient. And like I said to you, we as horse owners, horse lovers, therapists, veterinarians really need to think about when we are applying our saddle on, or a saddle that is asymmetric or not fitting to that horse, what effect is that having on the shoulder girdle? And then taking one step further is, what effect is even then putting the girth on? Because if you can imagine, if you have an injury or you're sore or discomfort in your shoulder area, and then we go and strap a corset to you and ask you to run up a hill, how are you going to feel? So we need to really start thinking about our horses and how they are responding. Is there a change in their behavior when you pop the tack on? Are they absolutely fine? Their gait doesn't change when you're lunging them, when you're walking them in hand. But the minute you put that saddle on or you tighten that girth, they change. That to me, we can't ignore that. That's your horse saying, I'm uncomfortable with the tack. It's causing discomfort around, in this case, the shoulder girdle. So I'm going to now talk about, now that we're done with the anatomy and some of the research side, I hope you're still with me. We're going to talk about some of the symptoms that I've come across horses suffering with shoulder girdle dysfunction. Now, again, it's individual to each horse, so I'm not saying one size fits all, but I think it's good to be aware, and actually, in another way, actually quite scary, how the array of symptoms that these horses can be displaying. So some of the symptoms I've come across is reluctance to stretch forward, difficulty balancing on three legs. And this is such an easy one to identify with your horses. And one of my questions I'll always ask my owners is, how is the horse for the farrier? Because a lot of horses should be absolutely fine balancing on three legs. If you lift up a front leg or a hind leg, they should be able to counterbalance themselves, no problem. If they are struggling and stamping their foot down or leaning heavy on you, start asking yourself why. We've spoken about this already, but I've mentioned about the gait changes with the saddle and the girth. They usually go from this lovely extended range of movement on their front end to very short, shuffly. And I've even seen horses like start to plait, so they almost like they're walking on a plank. Behavioral when girthed up. One of my real kind of bugbearers is when I see a new client and I've been told, well, they're always girthy, it's normal. It's not normal. It is up to us to find out what that horse is trying to tell us. Reluctance to stand still for the farrier. This is quite interesting because you would think if there is an injury to the shoulder that the horse would limp, or there would be a head knot present. Not in all cases, and this can be why it's quite hard to diagnose unless you have a very good veterinarian or a therapist that's working together. Is it's not a black and white head knot. It's not a joint. Remember, there's no attachment there from a joint. It's soft tissue. It's muscular. It's fascia connection. So there is no head knot, and in some cases, even if you were to block the area, so nerve block, it would make no difference. Other symptoms is I've come across horses that take longer to warm up. So you can really see a big difference from, say, 10 minutes to warm up into 20 minutes. Their gait really starts to open up. They have this odd gait in front, which is like a flipping of their front toe. Again, for those of you that are therapists, this is my subjective assessment and recognizing patterns. As I've said before, there's actually no research on this, so I'm very aware that this is all subjective, but it's kind of what I've been finding over the years and years of treating and seeing common patterns in horses. They have a decrease in the cranial phase of the front limb, so as the limb is coming forward, their stride length is shorter. As I've said, they don't always block out to nerve blocks. And most of the riders, and most of you have really good feel, you know your horse very well, is they can just feel like something is off under saddle, but you really struggle to relay exactly where the issue is. I remember riding a beautiful big warm blood mare many years ago that she was about 17 too. And she described a lot of these symptoms. So it was like intermittent head nodding on one rein, nerve block on the vet out, even a bone scan brought up nothing. And I could feel it really under saddle. but I couldn't quite describe to the vet what it was because there wasn't a head nod. And when she did show a head nod, it was maybe on the corner, but it was very, very intermittent. And if I'd known now what I could give to that lovely mare, I would have really helped her. And I keep learning from the horses, and I thank her for showing me that. But yeah, it's really hard to describe as a rider, but you just feel like something is not quite right in front. Okay, so how can you assess? And this is stuff that you guys can do today, every day with your horse. Okay, the most obvious one is pictures. My phone is covered in pictures, and for those of you that know me, I'm always taking pictures. The best thing to do is stand your horse up on level ground. If they can stand up as square as possible, that would be best. But if your horse is struggling to stand square, that is another sign that something's not quite right. Take pictures from all angles. Obviously, I'm talking about the shoulder girl here today, and these two horses here, you can see I've stood them up and I've just taken pictures directly, almost lifting their head up underneath them. For me, I would take pictures of your horse once a month. The other option is hands-on. So we've all got hands. You don't have to be a highly trained therapist. Start feeling if there's any differences between the muscles on the shoulder on the right side to the left side. Also by hands-on, and it's some of the exercise I'm going to give you today, is lifting up a front leg and compare right to left. So is the horse heavier on one side than the other? Are they fighting you to say get off? All of these things you can do from a hands-on perspective to help with assessment. The other thing is filming. So like I said to you, some of the symptoms that some horses describe in terms of they take longer to warm up, you as the rider feel like something's off, but you're not quite sure, and it's quite intermittent with the head nod. If you can do as much filming of yourself riding the horse or comparing them on the lunge, the better, and the more evidence you'll have that if something does result in the horse really displaying signs of discomfort, you can show your vet. Because I don't know how many of you have come across this, but you feel like your horse is not right, the therapist said it's not right, you take it to the vet, which is normally, it's like a specialist vet, you have to take them to the practice. When you arrive, the adrenaline's pumping and they're trotting out beautifully. It's probably the best you've ever seen them trot. And you just think to yourself, great. And the vet's going, it looks great, doesn't he? So we've all been there. If you can have film and start filming and show the vet, you have much more chance of getting to the diagnosis quicker than them rocking up and they're full of adrenaline because they're in a new area. Another key assessment is the saddle and the girth. Saddle and girthing for me, I'm not an expert. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert. I hold my hands up. Saddle fitting is a whole new domain. But the key thing about the saddle fitting is, and to give all of you owners and I'm sure the therapists, you'll know that it is subjective. There is still limited standardization and standardization of saddle fitters. So we really need to be very aware of the questions your saddle fitter is asking you, how they are assessing your horse and saddle and rider, and is your horse responding well to the saddle? And it's that, don't complicate it. If you bring your saddle out and your horse walks away from you, there's an issue. Keep it simple. If you pop the saddle on their back and they start showing you ears back, snarling, it's the saddle. Take it off, change it, speak to your profession. They need to sort it out. Horses do not lie. If there's something bothering them, they will tell you immediately. And that's the beauty of them. Another assessment, if you want to get a little bit more data driven, is buy one of these flexi curves. They are so cheap. They're like £2-3 on Amazon. And every month or every 6 weeks, they're very flexible. Pop them at the base of the withers, and so over your horse's withers, and take a piece of paper and just literally draw the outline of the wither and then date it. It is the most simple way to monitor and assess, if your horse has any asymmetry right to left, but actually, are they building muscle? Because you would expect, if your horse is in full work and your exercises are getting more difficult in terms of you're asking more, you'd expect the muscles to be building up, not getting smaller. So it's a really simple measuring thing that I think we should all be doing. The last thing I would recommend doing, and I've just shown you an example here, is picture their shoulders. And I've said you can do this from the front, but another way is if you, please, from a safety perspective, be careful, stand behind them and make sure they're stood square behind, and just take a picture of their shoulders from this angle here. It is the most simple way to see if your horse has a dropped shoulder or muscle asymmetry. And again, it's part of something that we should be doing as responsibilities for our horses at least once a month or every 6 weeks. Okay, how to treat shoulder girdle dysfunction. So the first thing we have to do is get a diagnosis, and the reality of that word alone is very scarce. This is the truth, unfortunately. As I said, there's not many papers on it. But if your horse has had an injury, we need to get to diagnosis. And if you're not happy with taking your horse to a particular professional, and there is a clear, muscle asymmetry, and that professional is telling you it's nothing, please trust your gut. You have a voice and you're speaking up for your horse, and it is up to us as therapists, as professionals, as veterinarians, to find out what is going on. So the first thing in the treatment is you need a diagnosis. Once you have a diagnosis and you know exactly where that area of dysfunction is or the issue is, you have to remove the pain. I know so many horses, and I've come across so many horses that because we haven't got a confirmed diagnosis from the vet, then what happens is we'll just try and figure out some exercises for the horse. But if they're in pain, and if we think about the anatomy again to the pictures I've shown you, if they're showing you they are in discomfort when you put the saddle on, if you're putting even the singles around them, or the rollers, around them, and they're showing you that is sore, given that I've just explained to you that it is a strong muscular connection chain, and you want to go and put on a really tight roller or a girth, and then we say, right, now you need to go and do some tailored exercises, you're fighting a losing battle. We need to work alongside professionals to help with the pain threshold so that they are comfortable to move. Otherwise, they're not going to want to not push, but use the range of movement to the best that they can. So first of all, diagnose. Second of all, remove pain. Third of all, tailored plan. And again, this is when you have to work with a professional who is knowledgeable, asks questions, and watches your horse, because everything changes in the body when you have a diagnosis and you remove the pain. The horse will naturally start to move better, and sometimes less is more. So sometimes doing the riding might have to be taken out altogether. Sometimes it might be a case of just doing an in-hand walk plan for 3 to 4 weeks. If you have a good therapist and you have someone who's prepared to ask questions and watch your horse with a fine eye and be in communication with your vet, that is the best way to improve shoulder girdle injuries that I've come across. But like I've said, again, there's no research on this. This is just my opinion and my collective data over the years of being a therapist. Okay, this is probably the bit that you guys wanted. So we're going to be talking about stable exercises before and after work. This is the shoulder girdle, and I'm going to give you 3 pole exercises that I would really recommend to do if you want to improve the shoulder girdle. Okay, let's start with the exercises. For those of you that know me, before I do any form of work with my horse, I want relaxation. I've said it before, for me, it's the building blocks. We want that horse in a state of relaxation, in a state of receptive communication with us. And unfortunately, there's no time limit to this. The more time you spend with your horse, I think someone's coming in, the more time you spend with your horse and you understand their sweet spot and get to know their areas that encourage relaxing, then you're on to a winner. So first step, relaxation. Second exercise is shoulder circles. I would pick up, again, front leg, right or left, doesn't matter. Start with drawing a circle with their knee, in essence. So imagine you're stirring a big pot of stew. Some horses that have tension in the pectoral girdle, or that muscle that I've said to you before, that serratus ventralis muscle, will really struggle when you move the leg away from the body. You'll feel like a real pull. They'll bring the leg happily in, but away from the body, they really struggle. And some horses will even stamp their foot down. So it's not only an assessment tool, but it is a great exercise to open up the shoulder girdle. The second exercise is the Wither Rock level 1 and 2. So the level will depend on your horse's level of training, their core strength, and where they are from a postural perspective. Wither Rock 1 is when all 4 feet are on the floor. You're going to place both hands or one hand at the top of the withers and very gently sway the wither towards you. So inhale, bring the wither towards you, relax. If you need more help on this exercise, if you visit my website, I have got videos on there of me doing this exercise to give you some clarity. Once your horse is comfortable with the Wither Rock level 1, you can progress to level 2. And level 2 is where, as you can see in the picture here, you lift up one leg, so they are balancing on 3 legs, which on its own is a great core exercise. And then you apply the same pressure through the wither. It's very light. Bring the wither towards you, release. And you're going to do, I would do 3 to 5 rocks on each side. For those of you that do this exercise all the time, so for me, that would be at least 4 or 5 days a week before work and after work, you will notice that your horse will change the way they stand within at least 2 weeks, because they are anticipating going on 3 legs. So that means they need to really almost have a leg in each corner to stabilize themselves. But B, you should notice that the amount that they rock reduces because they are getting stronger and they're engaging their smaller postural muscles. Those smaller postural muscles are the ones that can be found between the rib cage and where the saddle would sit, but then also the shoulder girdle. Okay, we're now going to talk about my top 3 pole exercises to help with the shoulder girdle. Okay, exercise number 1 is random poles and cones. This picture here is obviously just cones, and it's done from a ridden perspective, but this is one of the most underused exercises in horses when we're training, and it is so important, and even for dogs. I would set up 3 to 6 poles randomly in the arena and slot some cones down and go in having absolutely no agenda. So walk into the arena and walk your horse around the cones, around the poles, over the poles at different angles, hold them on the pole, ask them to sidestep across the pole, just have fun with it. For me, this exercise, if you do this exercise once a week, you are going to help your horses, not only their shoulder girdle, but their proprioception to an nth degree. For those of you that don't have access to an arena, you don't use your imagination. So if you go out hacking, changing the undulation, stepping over logs, halting with the log in between so they're back on their front legs, doing the same thing, sidestepping over. There's so many different things that you can do from a proprioception level just in walk that would really benefit not only the shoulder girdle, but those posture muscles. And again, as if I said, I would do this exercise at least once a week with my horse. The second exercise is the star, I call it, level 1. Obviously, I've called it level 1. There are a variety of levels to this exercise, but I'd start with level 1. And depending on the size of your horse, if you have a horse that's over 16 hands, you can tell here in the middle here where X is, I would actually move the poles further apart. If you have a horse under 16 hands, you can easily do it with the poles joined to, over here, over X, just kind of joining together. The aim is to be walking the horse down the middle of each pole. So they're almost doing like a big circle, like 10-meter circle, and to be in the middle. Very obvious, I would do this both reins. Why is this exercise great? They're obviously on a bend. Okay, so they're either having, if we're going onto the right rein, they're having to open up the muscles on the left side and contract the muscles on the right side, and vice versa on the other side. I'm obviously talking about the shoulder girdle today, but this exercise will also have a positive effect through the back, the rib cage, and your horse's pelvis. For horses, a little bonus, for horses that tend to lean in quite a lot and fall onto the shoulder, I would raise the inside of each of these poles. So as they're going over, they're having to really lift up that front leg and step it over, which in some horses avoids them falling in on the shoulder. The third exercise is fan poles. So fan poles, you can do loads of exercises, but it's almost taking the previous exercise, the star, to a new level. So it's increasing the difficulty basically. With all my exercises, my owners know that I love doing in-hand work in walk first, progress to walk ridden, and eventually to the trot. Just to give you some variety of ideas with fan poles, you can see here, this image at the top here is just a bog standard poles on a bend, and you can walk the horse round. If you want to be a bit more creative, the top right-hand image is 3 poles at E, 3 poles at B, and just doing a big 20-meter circle around them. If you wanted to progress that one to more difficult, if you go to the bottom left here, I've done the same amount of poles, so 3 at E, 3 at B, 1 in the middle, and then again in walk, I'd almost do like a figure of 8 over the poles. So you're kind of going over the poles at B, in the middle, change the rein, and then over the poles at E. Starting walk, if you wanted to make it a bit more fun, interesting, as your horse goes over the pole in the middle, hold them over the pole, walk on. There's so many things we can do with just quite simple amount of poles. And then if your horse is a bit more advanced and you wanted a bit more of a challenge, this exercise is great. So the same principle of having 3 poles at E, 3 poles at B, and then having 2 poles at an entry and exit. So as your horse is coming in, you go over the poles, you do a circle, and then they would leave the circle and go over the last 2 at the end. Quite a nice exercise to do in the trot as well. And I'd probably do this exercise on the long lines or ridden. But yeah, it just gives you some variety of fan pole exercises that you guys can do with your horses. So just to have a little recap, we spoke about my top 3 in-hand exercises, which for the shoulder girdle, which would be relaxation, small circles, the wither rock, level 1 and 2. And remember, these ones you do before and after work, at least 4 or 5 days a week, consistently for 6 weeks. If you wanted some pole work exercise ideas, my top 3 would be random poles and cones, the star, level 1, and the fan poles, which I've given you quite a variety of exercises with fan poles. Again, if you wanted the best frequency and consistency, I would be doing these kind of exercises, the poles, at least 2 days a week, ideally not on the back, from the ground, consistently for 6 weeks. Okay, I just got exciting news because a few people have messaged me that are already seeing my content on my website, which is all free, by the way. I've created, which is releasing on the 1st of May, an online subscription, which is, for those of you who are on the webinar today, if you email me and say you're keen, you're in, it's going to be £15 a month. And on this subscription, you are going to get an access to all the activation exercises I would recommend. You're going to get pole exercises. Some of them I've just shown you, but there's going to be, there's over 40 exercises. I've got, for those of you that have no poles, no problem. I can give you some exercises that you can still do to help your horse. I'm going to give you access to baited exercises, which just means your light stretches after work. You're going to have access to warm-up ideas, cool-down ideas, plus free access to all the webinars I do, which I'm going to be consistently doing every 6 weeks on different topics. And for those of you anatomy buffs, I've got anatomy drawings, which I'm going to put in there as well. So if you guys want access to this, obviously you don't have to be one of my clients. If you're a therapist and you want access to give your clients some exercises, or you're an owner who needs more inspiration, then let me know. It's going to be release date is the 1st of May. I'm really excited about this one. And that is it. So I hope you're all still with me. I'm now going to stop the presentation and we're going to do a live Q&A. So let's stop this. Okay. Who's with me? Who would like to ask a question? If not, I have got some pre-submitted questions, but I thought I would just ask you guys out there first. Has anyone got a question they'd like to ask me? If you do, raise your hand. Okay, so no problem. I have got a question that was pre-submitted on my Instagram, and this was from a lady who has a hunter, and he had a kick to the pectoral, and she wants to know what exercises she can do to help the pectoral region. My answer to this would be, and I have already replied to her, would be, as we've seen, we need to have a proper diagnosis. We need to know, is it only the pectoral region? I've had a case with one of my clients that there was an injury to one of the pectorals. There's obviously multiple pectoral region girdles, but the issue was, even though that was injured, the horse had issues higher up in the lower neck. So we've got two things there, which is now being diagnosed, and now we can treat accordingly. So my answer to what exercises can help the pectoral: first, we need a diagnosis. Second, we need to release pain, make sure there's no impingement, and the horse is happy to move. And then third would be, the foundations would be some of the exercises I've shared with you today. However, we would take it up one step further by adding on either some proprioceptive devices to the hoof, but also we would do more kind of stability exercises through the abdominal region, and also gentle weight shifting right to left. So that we want my answers. Does anyone else have any questions, or are we happy to leave it there for tonight? We good? Okay. Thank you so much for joining me, everyone. This has been recorded, so you will have an access to the link. If you have any questions, though, about this presentation, or if you'd like to have more of a one-to-one with me, send me an email. Let's talk. I'm here to help you all. And like I said earlier, my mission is to help you guys understand groundwork so that we can help our horses and that we can ride them in the long term. So thank you for joining me, and I will see you again soon.